Happy Halloween, everybody, and welcome to Billy Nutjo's Rant. This is a makeup Halloween episode because of the fact that the 200th episode takes a lot of work to make, and as such, there has not been an episode for multiple weeks, and we can't have that. So let's just do it now. And more or less this exact same situation happened last year, so I guess it's kind of a tradition to have an on Halloween Day Halloween episode when something else is being worked on, but whatever. And also, just like last year, we are wearing buddy matchy costumes. This time, even more buddy matchier. Bet we fooled you for at least a second, I'd say. Half second, quarter second, nanosecond, picosecond, some degree of time. I'm sure you were a little confused. One of the funnest things about buddy matchy costumes is the coordination. Because coordination is very fun. Yeah, even the trees are into the Halloween spirit. See that? They're covered in, I want to say caramel? Ugh, I hope not. That's not how you make candy apples. Speaking of things that shouldn't be in candy, lots of people everywhere have been complaining about some rather rude people who would put inedible things inside of candy and then hand it out to people. Yeah, like poisoning apples and stuff. Like, who do these people think that they are? This isn't Snow White. What kind of normal person poisons apples? A jerk, that's what. But you know what's even worse than poisoning apples? Giving out apples on Halloween anyway. Why would I want an apple? I didn't go out trick-or-treating for apples. If I wanted an apple, I'd go outside, find an apple tree, and eat a darn apple. Because I know that trees, they love me. They wouldn't poison me. Unless it's poison ivy or poison oak. But hey, if a plant has poison in the name, I don't think I'm necessarily going to be hanging around near it. Although I guess a foolproof strategy for not getting tainted Halloween candy would be to only trick-or-treat at your friend's house. Obstacle 1, have friends. Obstacle 2, have enough friends that it's not boring. Those are two pretty big obstacles that not a lot of people can overcome. So I can understand the primal urge to want to go over to a stranger's house, knock on their door, and take their candy, however tainted it might be. I mean, surely this can't be that big of an issue, right? Really, out of the entire population of wherever, how many people do you really think are evil enough to give out poison stuff on Halloween? So similarly to last year, where I gave tips on how to not get hit by a car because it's so dark on Halloween, this year I guess I'll give some tips on how to make sure you go to safe houses on Halloween. However, keep in mind that this is supposedly a comedy, so take any advice I say with a pinch of salt equivalent in grams to the amount of razor blades last found in the last apple you received on Halloween, which thankfully should be 0. First tip would be good old jack-o'-lanterns. If a house has some pretty cool jack-o'-lanterns, that probably means that the person inside is a happy Halloweener, and all they want to do is give candy to everyone on the hollowest of weens, whatever that means. If a house has no pumpkins, that's definitely not a point for them, unless the person only put up jack-o'-lanterns to attract more people to give out more poison. Never mind, disregard previous information. Second tip could be tasteful lawn decoration. So let's say you're in this scenario. You're in your house, perfectly tastefully decorated for Halloween, with lights and spiders and cobwebs and a third spider-related thing, maybe some fangs or something. And you look over to your across-the-street neighbor, and you see that there's an Iron Maiden in their yard. That may not necessarily be a bad thing, but when you remember the fact that that Iron Maiden has always been there, and it wasn't just put out for Halloween, that may raise a few red flags. Although a third possibility could be that your across-the-street neighbor is actually a scientist, and that Iron Maiden is just a creative entrance to their lab, where you go in the Iron Maiden, and then it takes you down to the lab, like an elevator. Because I guess maybe scientists have a passive and healthy obsession with medieval torture devices. If that specific scenario does apply, disregard previous information. This third tip may take a while to set up, and thus will only be useful next year, so prepare in advance. So what you do is you make a list of everyone in your neighborhood that you're planning to trick-or-treat on, and have their names, all on one big list. And then as you're trick-or-treating, you look at the names, and make sure the people you're taking from are the same people that you've gotten to know over the course of that year. Because of course the whole reason of writing down their names is that you can become friends with all of them, so that the friend strategy will work more broadly. So that way, next Halloween, you can go trick-or-treating with a list of everybody in your neighborhood that you're planning to trick-or-treat at. So you knock on the door, ring ring, open it, trick-or-treat, also what's your name and identification? If that person says, oh, I'm, I don't know, Preston Degas, you check your list, Preston Degas. Wait a minute, nobody's on my list named Preston Degas. Get your asbestos Twinkies away from me, Preston Degas. Then you slam the door and walk off all cool. I'd say out of the 3, that's my most legitimate strategy. The personal legitimacy of each of these strategies you may find will of course be accounted for the amount of razor blades you last found in an apple last year, so there are still some variables to weigh in, but I think that's the best trick-or-treating strategy by far. But then again, that's for next year and this is this year, and I don't really feel like planning an entire year today. So, hey Jelly, you want to alternate trick-or-treating at each other's houses all night? This has been Billy Nutjo's Rant. Have a happy Halloween. Hello, and finally welcome back to Billy Nutjo's Rant, as there hasn't been an episode in multiple months because of, well, And it seems to be once again winter. Strange how that happens every year. If you're ever dissatisfied with the current temperature, just remember you could be living on, like, Venus or something, where it's always scorching hot all the time. That does not sound fun. Thankfully, we live on Earth. I assume. I don't know, someone could be watching this on a space station. And if so, hello! I hope you're breathing responsibly and brought enough air. I don't know why I brought up the seasons at all, because this rant is not going to be about seasons, unlike most other rants during seasons, which I guess would be all the time, which is not really true, but whenever it's the start of a season, I always talk about seasons, and I'm bored of talking about seasons. Let's talk about something more relevant. Shows. Right now, and I don't mean to alarm you, but you are watching a show, which makes that a relevant topic. And you watching that show most likely consider yourself a mature person. Am I correct? Because of course you are. This is a mature show. And I know it might have just sounded like I said that condescendingly, but I don't. This is 100% a very mature show. Now, physically, it may not look that mature, but believe me, once you've seen a few things, definitely mature. And when I say mature, I don't mean mature as in violence or, like, profanity, because there is no violence or profanity on the show. Alright, maybe some violence, but I certainly wouldn't want people mistaking this show for a kid's show, or just a show for little kids, because shows for little kids tend to have negative stigma towards them. Does that mean that the actual shows themselves are bad? Well, in most cases, no. But just the fact that they're in the same general age demographic as other shows that do have a bad reputation for being condescending and dumb and boring drags them down. Now, in an effort to make everyone happy, I'm not going to actually give any examples of kids' shows that I think are bad. I know, be there, be square, and obviously I wasn't there. It's kind of a lame thing to do, but I want you now to imagine your least favorite kids' show. Now, if I had to take a genie guess at what you were thinking of, I would guess that the show you were thinking of could possibly contain bright colors, annoying pitchy voices, and characters directly talking to the audience. Ah, nuts, isn't that what I'm doing? You know what? Forget I said anything to you. I'm gonna stop talking to you. Hey, Jelly, you know what I really think is a kid's show that gets bogged down for it being a kid's show? Dora the Explorer. A show that's main goal is to teach little kids how to speak Spanish. Emphasis on the little kids, because in order to learn a new language, you're gonna have to stick with it for a long time. And it being a kid's show gives it an expiration date, because obviously, you don't want to be watching Dora the Explorer when you're at the ripe age of 12 or 13, in most cases. So by that time, you've probably forgotten most of the Spanish she's taught in. That's the correct conjugation, yeah? Taught. Now, yo no hablo español. Well, I mean, like, second year high school español, but así at the best. But I could have been speaking Spanish a whole lot better had Dora been for a more mature audience. Which, come to think of it, I think there was actually a Dora movie recently that, like, had a more mature thing, because it was, like, live action or something. But I don't remember her actually teaching Spanish in that. Or the movie at all in general, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Although I do think the title was like Dora the Machora finds the magic temple of something or another. Quick, awful segue. I've been talking to you using words, yes? Well, another kid show that I think is actually pretty cool is Word Girl. You've probably heard of it. It's like one of the most popular PBS kids shows. And just in case you haven't heard of it, well, really the idea is right there in the title. It's about a superhero named Word Girl, whose superpowers include knowing words. And also, like, flight and lasers and stuff, but obviously the knowing words part is the most interesting part. Yes, knowing words is her main superpower. It says they're right in the theme song. When faced with a catastrophe, you need a living dictionary. Which, I mean, you really don't, but I guess it would be nice. Although I guess the very next line is, her superior intellect keeps the crime world in check. So I guess the word part isn't really the main focus. It's the fact that she's really smart and can outsmart the villains. Which does make more sense. But then again, that really doesn't help her stand out too much, because really, mostly all superheroes are pretty intelligent. Mostly all non-canine superheroes are pretty intelligent. Although I guess she's better than the superheroes who just use, like, machines to get the job done, like Batman or Iron Man, because she can actually fly. Which is pretty cool. But unlike Batman and Iron Man, she's helping save the next generation of kids by teaching them about words like, I don't know, rambunctious? That was probably a word of the day one time, rambunctious. And returning back to that thing I said earlier with the violence and the profanity, that's another thing that kids shows don't have a good time with. Being censored. Yeah, being censored, like songs on the radio sometimes, when they bleep out words, or just leave long pauses between them to cut out the words entirely, because it's not like it's a song and needs rhythm, right? For example, I could just completely stop talking randomly in between sentences, and you can replace the words that I'm not saying with Swearing. But when I think of swearing, really, I don't think about radio edits or parents complaining that a scene in a TV show that their little kid saw was too scary or too mature. What I think of is Elvis Presley, pretty famous guy. You've probably heard of him because he was once on a show called the Ed Sullivan Show, I think. And while he was on the Ed Sullivan Show, they said, "All right, Elvis, we're going to have you on the show and you're going to perform whatever song. But with one major stipulation. We don't like your dancing because it's too, I don't know the word. It's not really that bad. He's just like, you're not allowed to use your legs for dancing because parents in the 60s or 70s or 80s, whatever decade this was, your dancing is too inappropriate. So instead of not dancing, because Elvis couldn't do that because I think he had ADHD or something, instead they just decided to film him from the torso upwards so that you couldn't see his legs. He was still dancing, but you just couldn't see the legs because the legs, those are the main problem. And the reason I'm bringing this up as the main example is because, well, what other shows do you know that only show characters from the waist up? Yeah, you don't know what I'm doing with my legs right now, and you'll never know. Because this has been Billy Nacho's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. Dear Billy, I am once again visiting my family in Ireland this year, so when I don't show up to the show tonight, know that it's not because I don't want to, it's that I physically can't, unless you're willing to invent a teleporter. Though you said you didn't want to talk about quantum mechanics again, so see you next week, buddy. Jelly. P.S. If you're reading this and don't know what any of that means, this probably wasn't written for you. Well, those are the inherent risks of leaving random letters on the street. Hello, welcome to Billy Nacho's Rant, where it is once again December somehow. What happened in November? That was a pretty good month. But I guess now it just didn't happen. And unfortunately, Jelly isn't here, which means I can't do anything that I've actually been planning, because otherwise that would be a waste. Because the way this currently works is that I'm the mouth, and she's the every other part of the body. So with only one person, this isn't really going to work. So as a backup plan, I guess we could just talk about Christmas movies, maybe? Yeah, I guess so. Christmas movies are a pretty boring topic, and I doubt anyone would miss missing them. Home Alone is a pretty popular Christmas movie. If you've never seen it before, you're never going to guess what it's about. It's about a kid who's home alone. And ooh, get this. The movie even has a sequel called Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, about the same kid, but this time, he's lost in New York. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because Home Alone, being a seasonal movie, is not really something that you'd watch more than annually, normally, right? Because it's about Christmas, and that only happens once a year, out of 365 or 4 or 6. I forget how leap days work. But still, it's not a thing you'd see very often, unless you're a super big fan of the movie who just watches the movies constantly. But I'm just not sure it's appropriate to watch them not on Christmas. But even if you've never seen Home Alone before, you're probably aware of the scene that's famous for, where the bandits, they try robbing the kid's house, but then the kid defends them in all sorts of crazy Rube Goldberg machines, which aren't actually that crazy. They're not that, it's pretty impressive for a little kid to have rigged up all this stuff in only a few hours, but I'm sure they got more crazy as the movies went on, because of course they would be. But that's just the thing. That's the scene it's famous for. As in that actual part isn't the entire movie. There's actually an entire whole movie going on about a kid learning to live by himself and be self-reliant, which I actually completely blocked out because, of course, the part where the guys get burnt, that's funny, but the rest of the movie is actually pretty good. And I didn't remember any of the scenes except for the part where the guys get burned, because it's funny. But even more specifically, there's one thing I want to talk about. The famous line in the movie, where the gangster guy on the TV says, something, 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 you filthy animal. And my question to you is, what does he say? Now, is it A, Merry Christmas, you filthy animal? Or is it B, keep the change, you filthy animal? Well, turns out, and this came as a shock to me, he actually does say, keep the change, you filthy animal. Which is quite surprising, because I remember, Merry Christmas, you filthy animal. And on all the merchandise and stuff, it says, Merry Christmas, you filthy animal. So, why doesn't he say it? Is that just a thing that people replace with keep the change, to give it more context to the fact that it's from a Christmas movie? Which, by the way, yes, the actual gangster scene isn't from an actual movie. It was filmed specifically for Home Alone, which is another thing that surprised me, but then again, that's not something you'd learn from just rewatching the movie, that's something you'd just look up out of interest. So where did Merry Christmas, you filthy animal come from? Well, the answer is, I've already said the answer. It's actually from Home Alone 2. Because in that movie, it plays a sequel to the movie, in the first movie, where I guess a similar scene happens between the gangster guy and someone else. Except I guess this time it's on Christmas. So he doesn't say keep the change, he says Merry Christmas, obviously. Another scene I misremembered is when one of the bandit guys is walking up the stairs, and he steps on a nail. I remembered the nail going all the way through his foot, but turns out he just steps on it a little and then jumps back, which does make it a lot funnier, because impaling your foot in a nail is not really pleasant. But hey, the part where the other guy gets blowtorched on the head is a whole lot more graphic than I remember, so I guess that sort of makes up for it. And before we move on, I'd just like to say, I personally take offense to the phrase, Merry Christmas, you filthy animal, or keep the change, you filthy animal, or whatever, because I know a lot of animals, and none of them are filthy. I mean, I know a skunk, and believe it or not, he actually smells very nice. I guess there's really no reason to get worked up over it, because it's just a metaphor. The gangster guy doesn't actually mean any misharm towards animals. He's just comparing the guy that he just shot to a filthy animal. And a quick grammar lesson, if he instead used a simile, it would be, Merry Christmas, you're like a filthy animal. Which, yeah, it does sound a lot more stupid. Yeah, that's what the S in simile stands for. It stands for stupid. The other letters, they don't stand for anything, but the S is stupid. And because of the fact that I didn't have anything planned, Home Alone is the only Christmas movie I can think of. So, I guess let's just talk about general movie things then? A thing that's quite annoying that's often said about movies is if you point out some sort of plot hole or something that doesn't make any sense. A common retort is, well, it's just a movie. Well, yeah, it's just a movie, and I expect my movie to be immersive. If I were making a cartoon, I would want to iron out all the plot holes I could. And the others that I couldn't think of? Well, that's where having a budget comes in. So, there's no reason for these movies to be not making sense. Oh, nuts. That reminds me. Have I been using my double and triple negatives properly? Jelly, have you picked up on any times that I misused it? Oh, right. You're in Europe, I forgot. Speaking of Europe, did you know that 10 out of 10 European countries are European? Now there's your educational value. This has been Billy Nacho's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. Hello, welcome to Billy Nacho's Rant. It's strange how December is called the holiday season, when in reality, every season has holidays in them. So, why isn't the holiday season just the holiday annual? I mean, there are only a little over 350 days in the year. And there are a lot of holidays and days of, dedication or memorial. So it would only make sense that there's a holiday in every season. And I don't even need that to be fact-checked, because I'm 100% sure there's a holiday in every season. For the aforementioned reasons. Seasons are great. The air tastes nice in winter. The air smells nice in summer. The trees look nice in autumn. And spring is there too. Sure, it's stupid to speak for the entire population of the planet. Has anyone ever woken up on Spring Eve and said, oh boy, I can't wait for it to be spring tomorrow. I can't wait to wake up and have the air put, green particles inside of me without my permission, because plants are just mean. I'm flattered you think I'm a flower, but please keep that stuff away from me. You're supposed to be invigorating the other flowers, not unvigorating me. Thankfully, there's a bodily system, the immune system, to look out for that kind of stuff, because if I had to do that manually, I don't think I could handle the paperwork. On a related topic of intestines, have you ever looked down on yourself, physically, not emotionally, don't do that, but have you ever looked down at yourself and at your stomach and just thought, wait, if there's all those intestines and, liver and stuff, how come they don't just slug out? I decided to do a little bit of research on this topic, and it turns out that, yes, thankfully there is an organ, like a wall or a pouch, that holds everything in place, so you don't have to worry about anything slipping out as easily as it would if that organ hadn't been there. And all the articles were saying that it was, quote-unquote, discovered in 2017, which I can't believe that. You're telling me that no scientist before 2017 had ever thought, I wonder what holds all the organs in there. Am I making some sort of medical breakthrough right now, had this taken place 5 years earlier? Because this just seems like common sense. Has surgeons who've worked on the human body never once saw this thing and thought, that looks important? No? Really? Who knows, maybe the accepted scientific reason was that the pelvis bone acted as sort of a cup to hold all the organs, and the rib cage was like the cork on top of the bottle, pressing everything into place. And maybe just the muscle or skin was the sides of the bottle. I mean, this whole thing just sounds like the medical version of, where are my glasses? Oh wait, they're on my face. But hey, scientists are people too. Everyone's had their I forgot to have breakfast this morning moments. Ooh, that reminds me of a really bad joke. What do you call a medical mistake? Heart stopping. Yeah, that's not funny. But you know what is funny? The word hearty. Hearty. Because it means, well, obviously, to be full of heart. Not literally, that would be disgusting. But metaphorically. I'm so happy right now. I'm so hearty right now. Stuff like that. But the funny part is, when I looked up the word hearty, and next to it said, not to be confused with hardy, Hardy. To which I thought in my head, hardy? Never heard anyone say hardy before. And hardy, Hardy, apparently means capable of withstanding difficult situations. And what would you need in order to be hardy, Hardy? Well, it would help to be hardy, Hearty. So, the words are basically synonymous, and they're pronounced the same, but spelled slightly different. Of course, I'm no expert on hardy, Hardy, though, so don't take my word for it, because again, I've never heard the word used before, except for now. And I'm sure you've never heard the word spelled out so many times in context of what it's being meant to represent, because exactly hardy and hardy. Which one am I saying right now? Hardy, 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 hearty, hearty, hardy. It's pretty much impossible to tell. Am I hardy or hardy for standing outside in the cold in winter? Who can tell for sure? Because you don't know if I just said two different words or the same word twice. Two similar sounding words with similar definitions to reduce confusion. Fighting confusion with confusion, because now I'm confused. But no matter what definition, I am honored to stand out here in the snow to help produce another episode of, I'm sure, probably one person's favorite internet show, of which you have been watching, titled Billy Nut Joe's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. Hello, welcome to Billy Nut Joe's Rant, and today I'm feeling great. Oh yeah, everything is fine. REFINED. Refined. Because at some point in the past, things were not fine, but now they are. So that's great. Fun things about the past are that they are in the past and not the present. And of course, only the things in the present affecting me right now. So everything is fine. Hello?
Hello.
Hi. What's your name?
Oh, you were wondering my name. Wow, I probably should have gotten that from context, sorry. Hello, Billy Nut Joe. My name is Creamy Cream Pop.
Creamy Cream Pop. Huh. Is that Italian?
No, I just really like ice cream.
That's funny. I also like ice cream.
Honestly, I'd be surprised if you didn't, because liking ice cream is not exactly a rare trait. This is why I usually start off my first conversations with my name, because I tend to not like to associate with people who don't like ice cream. You know, partially ice cream the food, and also mostly the me.
Yeah, that's a good strategy that I should probably be following too. Do you want to be friends?
Well, who says I'm here to make friends? Maybe I just happened to run into you on the way to someone else. No, I'm just kidding. I do want to be friends.
Okay then, Mr. Cream Pop. How would you like to choose today's topic as a friend benefit? Of course, assuming you're aware of what I'm up to right now, because, well, you seem to already know my name, so I'm guessing you probably know the general idea.
Topic, how about, motorized? No. The thought process behind, I'm sorry, I have nothing. I'm not sure what's up with that, because usually crazy ideas come to me all the time. That's kind of my favorite thing about myself. But seems that I can't think of anything right now. I don't know, Billy. You're the show owner here. Why don't you just use those 3 words that I gave you and come up with something from there?
Motorized thought process. Sounds to me like computers. Computers are used so often, you often don't think about how they're actually made. Because obviously programs on a computer are written in code, but what's the code that controls that code? And how is the code that coded the code coded in and of itself?
Yeah, exactly. If I want to make a computer out of some sticks and a rock, what's preventing me from doing so besides not knowing how to do that? Or if, I wanted to fold it out of origami, shouldn't that be doable?
That's along the lines of what I was thinking. A computer is just a machine that does what it's told, and if you're folding the paper, then you're telling the paper to be folded. So isn't that kind of like a computer? And even me asking you to ask me what kind of topic we should do, that's kind of like 2 computers talking to each other. And of course the brain is the best computer in the world. Well, maybe not best. There are supercomputers that can do like a bajillion times the amount of braining that brains can do, but you know what I mean, right? It's certainly the most mysterious, because no one exactly knows how the brain works. You know, there's dopamine and stuff, but where does it go exactly?
And if the brain isn't the most best or most mysterious computer, it's certainly the most accessible. And it's definitely not the most fun to use.
The most fun computer to use is the one that you're watching this on. That ends every time with, "This has been Billy Nut Joe's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed."
Hey! You're just gonna end it right there? I just got here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to keep going?
No. You can go back to your home and rest. Don't worry about me. I prefer getting my entertainment nomadically. I'm sure I'll find something else to do. Good night, Billy Nut Joe. I hope we see each other in the future sometime.
Good night, Creamy. I also hope to see you again sometime. Wow, a guest on the show who isn't jelly or phlegm, who's actually nice. It pains me this is the exception. How come everyone can't like ice cream and talking with friends, huh? To compare apples to oranges is an expression that you've probably heard before. What does it mean? Well, it basically means that's an invalid comparison. Why bother comparing apples to oranges when they're so different? But when you say it out loud, you kind of see the cracks in that argument against arguments. Apples and oranges, they're both in the same category of thing. It's not like you're comparing apples to chainsaws, because those are two entirely different categories. Apples and oranges, they're pretty closely the same thing. Just, one's an apple, one's an orange. Now, I've done some of these rhetorical sort of expressionary questions, or just general, lesser-known things before. But this, comparing apples and oranges, doesn't really have a definitive end goal. There's not a specific amount of comparisons that need to be made between apples and oranges in order to get the job done. I'm just going to try my best. So, of course, firstly, the first thing when you think between apples and oranges is the color. Apples have a whole lot more variety in terms of colors. There are the classic red apple, the tangier green apple, and the yellow apples, which, who eats yellow apples? I don't know what they taste like. And then oranges have a very limited color palette. Of course, consisting of, I think they're green. On the natural side of things, oranges definitely have the advantage, because after all, fruits are technically living things, or so I've been told. Now, granted, they aren't intelligent living things, but they are living things. And so they need protection, because they have, no body parts or anything else to protect them with, except for skin. Apples have a very smooth skin, and there's really no point of removing it before eating it, unless you're, a toddler, or need to make, applesauce, and you don't want pulp in the applesauce, which I'm not exactly sure the term for skinned apple remains. But oranges have the superpower of actually having skin that makes it difficult to get on the inside, like skin's supposed to do. So that's definitely interesting. Apples, however, have one more body part that oranges don't have, and that's a neck. Or I guess in this case it's called a stem, but for this demonstration, it's a neck. And what does necks lead to? Well, if you have a neck, then that means you can be strangled, which is definitely a physical disadvantage. While oranges, they don't have necks. They have what would be anatomically compared to a belly button. Apples do have an alternative sort of way of attacking people who are trying to eat them, in that, of course, the classic saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And not having a doctor could lead to negative health benefits, like not having a doctor. Although possible exceptions to this rule include if you're allergic to apples, or if your doctor likes shopping in the produce section. While still on this subcategory of categorization, another natural thing about living things is how they make more of themselves, how they reproduce. However, off the top of my head, I have zero idea how either apples or oranges reproduce in the wild. And even if I did, that's the kind of thing you need a permission slip for. Moving on to the second subcategory. Comparing apples and oranges is pretty boring, honestly, though more exciting than watching paint dry or watching grass grow. Not nearly as exciting as watching bamboo grow, though, because I actually heard that bamboo grows so fast that it's actually possible that if you just stare at it for a whole day, you'll actually see it sort of grow. Isn't that fun? But apples are not all just apples, and oranges are not all just oranges. They have separate subcategories. Like for apples, there are Granny Smith apples, which I think those are the red ones, and there are Macintosh apples, which, actually no, I think that's a computer. And then of course there are crab apples, which I have no idea what a crab apple is, but it sounds scary. Actually wait, no, Granny Smiths are the green ones, and a good way to remember that is Granny refers to an elderly person, and what kind of elderly people are green? Witches. Exactly. And how does a green apple taste? Sour. And witches are always grumpy, so they're in a sour mood. Excellent remembrance. Oranges don't exactly have subspecies of oranges, like apples do, as in they don't share the same name, but oranges do have sort of sister fruits that are pretty much the same thing. Tangerines are a fun one, and one of my personal favorites, because they're like oranges, but without much hassle, and they're smaller, which makes them cuter, which surprisingly does not detract from the eating experience, because you'd think eating something cute would be difficult, but turns out it's actually not. Okay, so if tangerines are a sister fruit to oranges, then wouldn't that make nectarines a sister fruit to tangerines, since they both end in the suffix -orines? Well, no, not exactly, because a nectarine is more like a peach, and a peach, though similar in color, is not exactly the same idea as an orange. It's more of a citrus avocado. But hey, I think that's enough talking about fruits with vitamins and minerals. I don't want to eat drugs and rocks in my fruit. I want some cool food. That's why we're going to be starting to talk about junk food, and which fruit has the advantage in the junk food department. Now, when you think candy and apples, you probably think of candy apples, or caramel apples, or donkey apples, as no one calls them. But really, does a caramel apple have the appeal of being an apple? No, it has the appeal of having caramel. That's why you don't say an apple caramel. You say caramel first, because it's the most important part. If you wanted an apple, just eat an apple. Get out of my Halloween party. And apples in the junk food department tend to be a lot more mature and for adults than oranges. Because, like, they're in all the fancy danishes and stuff. Things that look like donuts, but don't taste nearly as good. And they're also an alcohol, which certainly makes them much less accessible to the general public. Although I guess there are also, like, Apple Jacks, that cereal that doesn't seem to be around anymore. I haven't seen it in a while. I wonder where it went. Where it was, like, apple and cinnamon flavored. I've never eaten it. It doesn't sound that good. But hey, what do I know? It has the same general cereal construction as, like, Fruit Loops or Cheerios. So there's no way it can be bad. It just may not be as good as those others, which are already not that good. They're just sort of average. Let's save cereal discussion for another day. Generally, when I see oranges in candy, I get a lot more excited than I do for apples. Because, like, an orange lollipop, oh boy, an apple lollipop, sure, I guess. But hey, I can't reference orange candy without talking about chocolate oranges. Which is like someone took an orange and said, I want this to be less orange and taste less like an orange. And then he dipped it in chocolate. Chocolate oranges truly are the caramel apples of oranges. And surely there's no way no one's ever thought of making smaller chocolate oranges, calling them chocolate tangerines, and then selling them in bags, right? A secondary alternative to an obvious answer of comparing apples and oranges, besides, well, their fruit, is that both of them can be made into jellies or jams or marmalades. You can say it any way, really, but obviously I have a personal bias. Well, I suppose for oranges it would be jelly, but for apples it would be more like a shosh. Yes, I dip my apple slice in the applesauce. I like apples. And there are dozens and dozens of different recipe variations on applesauce, and I really don't want to get into them, because there's like cinnamon and apple flavored. Those are the only two I can think of, but I'm sure there are a lot. There's like the IV bags that you put the end in your mouth and you roll it up. That's a valid applesauce distributor. In conclusion, what did we learn today? Well, apparently Billy Nut Joe struggles pronouncing shosh. Shosh. Apple shosh. Apple sauce. Apple sauce. Yeah, see, if you say it like a cowgirl, it helps with the pronunciation. Mr. Bartender, I'd like a fine quart of your best applesauce to feed to my horse, for my horse has not had a doctor's visit in a long time, because my horse eats apples. And as you know, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Wait, why is she buying applesauce if applesauce is what's causing her horse to be in bad health? Man, don't point out plot holes in my silly stories. Just, it's past your bedtime. Go to bed. This has been Billy Nut Joe's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. You know, assuming you haven't died from apples. Jelly, I missed you so much. You are not going to believe what happened while you were away. Well, actually, I suppose it isn't that unbelievable, but I made a new friend, and you're going to have to meet him sometime. He's pretty cool. Also, hey, what's your favorite cereal? Yeah, exactly. That was the answer I was expecting. Because, believe it or not many people are fond of cereal. Because although breakfast is called the most important meal of the day, it's not called that because it's generally the most enjoyable. Because after all, the term breakfast means exactly as it sounds, breaking fast. And fast is the term for when you don't eat for a long period of time, also known as when you're sleeping. So when you wake up, you eat cereal, partially to enjoy it, but mostly just because it's like energy. Just a thing you're putting in yourself to make sure that you're still active next time you have to put more food in yourself. Well, of course, anything explained like that doesn't sound exciting. Like, for an on-the-spot example, during your entire vacation time, did you ever wake up and just eat a plain old bowl of cereal? My point exactly. Despite what the commercials and mascots may tell you, cereal is not exactly the most extravagant of dishes. It's just sort of a thing that you'd eat. While it's sort of fun, but there are so many better tasting things that are just as fun, as I just said, better tasting. There are dozens and dozens and dozens, and I'm not going to go much further than that, other alternatives to breakfast than just plain old cereal. But, of course, cereal is still popular because it's easy to prepare and has a respectable, easy to preparedness to taste ratio. Like, you don't have to heat up a bowl of cereal in the microwave unless you have, like, one of those weird branded cereals where it's, like, not so much cereal as it is just Pop-Tarts in a bowl. But even then, I'm sure Pop-Tarts and milk sounds scrumptious. Or, like, I remember when Sour Patch Kids cereal got a lot of news coverage. That's just barbaric and an insult to cereal. You can't just put candy in a bowl and call it cereal. There's a science, people. Although I suppose it's not the least intuitive thing to put in a bowl of milk, because Sour Patch Kids is not exactly the most extreme, spelled with an X kind of sour. It's mostly just a leave the roof of your mouth a little teared up and, maybe some tearing in extreme doses of just the white powder at the bottom of the bag. But, it's nothing horrible. They definitely achieved the status of being the best children to eat, though. And then, of course, there's a whole text tsunami on the back of the cereal boxes, where it's just all the nutrition facts and fun facts that are not exactly fun, and color palettes, and all that sort of stuff. What are calories if not just points you score at lunch? And who can bring up nutrition fact labels without the despicable per serving thing, where it's 400 calories per 2 cereal pieces? Sounds like a fun time, let me in. And the sports cereal. Those are only for pure athletes. We gotta keep the calorie count low. Let's see, vitamins, minerals, some supplements, and styrofoam. That has no calories. And maybe some food coloring too. Pick it up at your local pharmacy. One of the most disappointing aspects about cereal are the mascots. Specifically the fact that none of the popular mascots are squirrels. What did the cereal executives say to the squirrel who tried out for being a cereal mascot? Are you kidding me? A squirrel? That's nutty. Cereal is kind of a tactile food to consume, because there's some strategies you want to be thinking about when eating it. For example, do I put this cereal in milk? Because if I do put it in milk, will it instantly dissolve? And then you get a nice milkshake. Or, in most cases, not nice. Unless someone were to design a cereal specifically made about melting into milk, into something good, then the solubility of a cereal is something that can make or break it. Because otherwise, you limit the audience that wants milk and are just saying, hey, you don't like milk? Come eat this, unless you want slop. That's probably the reason why lots of bottom-of-the-barrel cereals taste like foam. Because styrofoam, it doesn't dissolve in milk. It doesn't dissolve in water. It doesn't dissolve in acid, most likely. It doesn't dissolve, period. Because it's, styrofoam. Enemy of the environment. Enemy of cereal enjoyers. You eat some styrofoam, it's gonna be there. And you're gonna have to live with it, I'm sorry. Dang it, cereal companies, just let me eat my weekly credit card amount of plastic and be done with it. I don't need any extra garbage. Thank you, digestive system, for allowing me to eat things and then get rid of those things later and replace them with new things. And thank you, nervous system, for allowing me to piece together that sentence without it sounding disgusting. And thank you, jelly, for sticking around despite the fact that there's nothing really to correct, because everything that I said that could be corrected was a joke. I'm tired and about ready to go home now. This has been Billy Nut Joe's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. Today is New Year's Day. That means tomorrow is the start of an entire new year. And I'm an optimist, so instead of saying, I got absolutely nothing done this year, I'd rather say, I got more done this year than if I had done absolutely nothing at all. What do shows usually do after a big anniversary event? Or I guess this is sort of an earthly anniversary event, because it's a whole year. A clip show? No. Do you have any idea how difficult it would be to assemble a clip show on Scratch? You'd have to go through all the old things and backpack everything and then put them together and switch the backdrops and no. People say clip shows are lazy and filler? Well, not in this case. Maybe on an actual TV program where they have reels on black tape, however that works, flips in front of the projector, flip, 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 flip. No, that's impractical, implausible, improbable. But you know what I am alive for? This, right now. So let's not talk about film reels. Let's talk about something worthy of a new year. You've most likely heard of the widely known concept of New Year's resolutions, which is where a person promises to change something about themselves for the new year. And a common logical loophole is, okay, so if I say next year I'm not going to do this specific thing, well, I guess on New Year's Eve, I might as well go all out, right? Which is why tonight I'm not eating any chocolate, as my New Year's resolution is to eat more chocolate. And I guess also on a more related note, the whole quantum mechanics thing. I've said it before, I don't want to talk about quantum mechanics. And so this new year, I'm going to officially bind it in writing, in my brain, not actually writing, that I won't talk about quantum mechanics. Time for some loopholing, because today we're talking about quantum mechanics. Today's secondhand crazy science lesson is not necessarily going to be exciting in the same way come on guys, let's fire up the Hadron Collider so we can find the Higgs boson, the holy grail of photons or whatever. No, this is more exciting in the, whoa, that's kind of crazy way. Let's talk teleportation for a second. Yes, seriously. Because after all, what's more futuristic and New Year's-y than being able to teleport? And unfortunately, it was months ago when I first learned about this, so feel free to do some research on your own. And don't trust everything I say 100%, because I don't trust everything I say 100%, and the scientists don't trust what they say 100%, as you'll soon know by what I'm about to say. So simply, the genius way that scientists thought of to make teleportation a possibility is. So the person goes inside the teleportation capsule or phone booth, or it's shaped like a phone booth, but it's not actually. There's no dial up. But what it does is it scans every single cell in the body, and it makes a list, checks it twice, finds out which ones are naughty and which ones are nice, keeps everything, only kidding about the naughty part, sends all that information to a separate tube, and then that tube takes all the particles and puts them back together to form a new you. Alright, okay, so it makes a copy of the person in the other tube. Nice. Now, Dolly the sheep, when you were writing this, did you know that we're working on teleportation and not cloning? Because this sounds like cloning to me. Well, yes it does, but the thing in the first tube, where the particles were taken from, the original person, is destroyed and scrambled up, and then put in the second tube. So it's not actually cloning. Oh, so the person who goes in the teleporter booth is destroyed, and then recreated on the other side, thus technically teleporting them. Yeah. Can you see why scientists might have a slight ethical issue with this idea? You guys want to teleport non-living matter? Like a pencil? You want to teleport a pencil, destroy the pencil, build the pencil somewhere else? Sure. We can have pencil ATMs all over America. That sounds great. But and this might be a controversial statement, but I don't think being destroyed and then just being rebuilt somewhere else sounds that fun. And I'm no genius, but I don't see how you could really test something like that. You put one person in one tube, teleport them, and said, okay, did you die and then come back? Because the person you're talking to is not necessarily the same person, but it kinda is. But would it have remembered being destroyed and then being rebuilt? No, they probably wouldn't have. I still think the pencil ATMs would be nice. And should there be some mystical future where this teleportation thing does work with no ethical concerns and no one dies using it, they should run extensive background checks on whoever's operating the whole particle list thing. Because if that person happens to have a grudge against the person who's being teleported, that teleportation person might come out a little different than they went in. And please don't put robots in charge of the teleportation list particle thing, because I know from personal experience, robots hate everyone. They really don't care. And Jelly, if I were in charge of your teleportation panel thing, I would not destroy you with the backspace button. But unfortunately, I think there are still a few decades left before teleportation becomes a thing. Because when you think about it, in order to subatomically recreate a brain to put in a person, wouldn't you have to understand how the brain works? Which is kind of a thing that hasn't been done yet. I'm sure they're making rapid progress, but I don't see teleporters by the year 2023. Though I would like to be wrong. Actually, no, I wouldn't. I don't mean to be negative, but I'd say the best case possible scenario is an article gets published in the newspaper or a science magazine or something that says man teleports the first pencil cap. And then everyone's like, oh wow, that's pretty impressive, you teleported the first pencil cap. And then 20 years of nothing. And then finally, hey, we teleported the first chipmunk. However, unfortunately, due to a copy and paste incident, we also teleported the second chipmunk. And then maybe 30 years later, everyone will receive a form to be added to their telepertoire, teleportation repertoire, where it's please sign your name, your birthday, and how willing you are to be atomized. But that's the far future we're talking about. This is today. What did I do today, you may be wondering? Well, I made a bunch of sarcastic statements about teleportation, and probably offended some pencils, but we'll make up, don't worry. I mean, I take pity on the things. In the far future, no one uses pencils. Everyone uses lightsabers. Good night, Jelly. I'll see you in a year. That's my favorite part about New Year's. Oh, and one more thing, Jelly. As a fun sort of activity for the New Year's, make sure at midnight you're doing something that takes a while, so that next day you can say that you took a year folding clothes or something like that. As for everyone else, though, this has been Billy Nacho's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. Holy cow, I can't believe I slept for an entire year. Isn't that crazy? I mean, I've heard of hibernation, but this is ridiculous. And gee, how disappointing is this? I must be procrastinating really hard, because it's been an entire year since the last episode. Wait, I have one more. I heard that Billy Nut Joe guy is pretty disgusting. He hasn't taken a shower in an entire year. Alright, I've gotten the New Year's out of my system. Now let's get on to an actual thing to talk about. If you've ever watched a TV show before, then you've probably come across, or have seen, maybe without even knowing it, a parody episode. What exactly is a parody is a very difficult question to answer. Only kidding. A parody is when you take an original piece of work and you make it sillier. Usually. Sometimes it can be taking something that is already silly and making it serious, but it's not funny, so it's not as good. A good example for this would be, imagine a crime documentary movie, but instead of real people playing the parts, it's Muppets. Now that, on its own, is already pretty silly, but if that's all that there happens to be in that parody, then it'd be pretty boring, because it's just crime but Muppets. And really, for it to be a better parody, the crime movie they would have to be parodying would have to be a crime movie already in existence. If it was just a crime movie about Muppets, then that would just be a crime movie about Muppets. It's only a parody if it's taking an existing thing. Although I guess it could work for a wide genre, but it would make more sense to just focus on one piece of work. And maybe instead of like, someone was murdered, it's someone stole the Cookie Monster's cookies, and now he's angry. But here's one of the problems with parodies. If you just do a bare bones thing, where it's just, hey, what if this, but instead of those characters, it's these characters, is, if the people watching don't know what the original thing that they're parodying is, and it's just the bare basics to qualify as a parody, then that wouldn't be very good, would it? Like, for my example just now, if you didn't know who the Cookie Monster was, which, I mean, you could probably figure it out by his name, but if I used his real name, which is Sid, don't ask me why I know that, then you'd be like, okay, who's Sid, and why does he like cookies? Although I suppose making a serious documentary movie about missing cookies is already in and of itself funny. But right now I'm just ruining my example. Another element of parodies, and probably why you see so many parodies of things like Star Wars or The Great Gatsby, that's because those are both popular, well-known things. It's very difficult to take something not well-known and then try to parody that, because part of parody is having an understanding of the original, and it's difficult to do that if you're parodying something nobody cares about, like Lancelot Link. It would be nearly impossible to make a parody about Lancelot Link, because no one cares about Lancelot Link. But there's another subcategory to parody called satire. And what differentiates parody from satire? Well, think of it this way. Parody is, hey, look at that thing. It's that thing, but now it's funny. And satire is like, hey, look at that thing. It's that thing, but now it's funny. And also society. Yeah, this is generally why satire is usually less fun than parody. Because in satire, it's saying something about something. It's conveying a message through parody. While parody is just plain, well, it's parody. Is it possible to write a parody of parodies? It would therefore be a satire on parodies? Well, yes, but that sounds like a fun writing exercise for another time. Here's a quick quiz. Is it parody or is it satire? Hi, I'm Garfield from the hit newspaper comic Garfield. I love lasagna and I hate Mondays. Let's blow up the Death Star. That would be parody. Or, hi, I'm Garfield from the hit newspaper comic Garfield. I love lasagna and I hate Mondays. I also hate the Constitution. That would be satire. An incredibly stupid satire that doesn't make any sense, but it's the first thing that came to my mind, so whatever. But why was that specific example the first thing that came to my mind? Well, unfortunately for us, satire often involves politics. Blah, ugh. Disgusting, not on my show. Because I know the amount of you who came to Billy Nut Joe's Rant for politics are the same amount who came for references to Lancelot Link. Absolutely zero. A really good example for anyone who's familiar with music and or music history would be parody is like Weird Al Yankovic, and satire is more like Bob Dylan. Now those are references more inclined to Billy Nut Joe's Rant. And speaking of Billy Nut Joe's Rant, since this show started exclusively speaking about Scratch-related topics, here's a Scratch-related parody example. Say, for example, someone makes a generic platformer, but it's not exactly a generic platformer, it's a parody on generic platformers, which means it sucks on purpose. That would not necessarily be a great parody, unless it was also really funny, because making something that sucks to criticize something that sucks is just making something that sucks, while drawing attention to something else that sucks. It's a lose-lose. Another super relevant example for parodies would be memes. If you've ever seen a meme with a famous character in it doing something that that character would probably not do, that could technically be classified as a parody. It's quite interesting I brought up Weird Al earlier, because his parodies are so famous that his appearances in forms of media, like in an episode of a TV show or a cameo in a movie, are often parodies of parodies, which is quite respectable. And technically, on a very specific level, what I'm talking about right now, the fact that I'm not talking about a Scratch-related topic when this show was originally created just to talk about Scratch-related topics, would sort of mean that the show is now a parody of the old show. But saying that a show is a parody of its former self is usually a bad thing, but I think in this case it's a good thing. Although I guess the whole parody of its former self thing isn't really all that you think it would be, because it's implying something negative, but parodies are usually funny. So, are you really just calling the thing funny? No, people who say that almost definitely mean the other form of parody, which is where you take something funny and make it not funny, which, as I said earlier, is the undesirable form. Because why remove comedy from something when you could add it? And I was considering ending this show with a parody of Billy Nut Joe's Rant, but hey, like I said earlier, a parody has to be something that someone cares about, am I right? But crash. Ha. Oh, but please though, I thrive off of unattention. After watching this, immediately wipe it from your mind, just like everyone on the face of the planet has wiped Lancelot Link away. I mean, that's the strategy that I'm using. I don't remember what I talked about yesterday, but hey, this has been Billy Nut Does Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. I remember that I say that at the end of all of them, don't I? You know, I actually met the model for the chocolate bunnies on the walk here. And, now I don't think I can eat this. Let's start this off by asking a simple question. What is one of the most popular games in the entire world? A game so simple that companies have to fancy it up with all sorts of intricate designs and fancy boards. Because if people figured out the fact that they could just use random household objects in place of pieces, it'd run them all out of business. The game I'm talking about is chess. You've probably heard of it. Of course you have. It's chess. It's not exactly a secret underground cool kids club game that no one's ever heard of. In fact, it's, in most cases, the complete opposite of that. Because as I said earlier, chess is one of the most popular board games. Because it's simple, while at the same time being very, very not simple. Chess, interestingly, manages to be a game that you can learn in both 5 minutes or 5 years, depending on how close you are to the game. I mean, there are professional chess players who could probably defeat me 10 times over in a quarter of the time it takes me to make one move. But then you could also just invite one of your friends over who's never played chess and just teach them the rules like, this one, it moves like that, and this one moves like that, and like that's the whole game, it's just moving things. And of course, I can't mention the basics of professional chess, of which I know nothing about, without mentioning one of the popular subgenres of professional chess, chess boxing, which is like normal chess, except the opponents give each other brain damage before. So that makes it more interesting. And while the main focus of chess, and really the only focus, is the gameplay, it's quite disappointing that for a game that's been around for dozens and dozens of years, probably even hundreds of years, that no one ever takes the time to appreciate the various well-written characters of chess. Probably because there aren't any, but I can make up some. The most famous character of chess is probably the pawn. Now, there may be 8 of them, but the pawn is an incredibly interesting individual, as the term pawn is so popular for a piece that looks like a snowman made of trapezoid is actually used for all sorts of other board games. And it's just become a general term. Like if you look at just any kind of board game that has a pyramid shape with a ball on top, that's a pawn. Pawn crosses multiple dimensions. He's not just in the chess dimension, he's all over your board game shelf. Just take a look. The pawn is very energetic and a fun-loving person, because while normally he can only move one space forward, which may not make him the most intelligent piece, but the fact that he can start by moving 2 spaces, if that's his first move, say that's pretty fun. While the pawn may not have much stamina, as it can only move 1 at a time after its initial burst of energy, an even more energetic character would be the rook. Or as us chess casuals call it, you know, the one that looks like a castle. Although I'm sure it resembling a castle is symbolic of maybe how tough it is for just running right there into battle, just in a straight line. That's a pretty cool thing to do. Because it doesn't really make sense for an actual castle to move like 10 times as fast as just a normal person. Unless chess actually takes place in the future where they have robot castles or like castle tanks. But that's most likely not the case because of the fact that, again, you know, the hundreds of years old. But hey, maybe the person who invented chess was also into science fiction, and that person thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool if castles had legs and they could walk around? And yes, that would be pretty cool. Not to mention the fact that the actual rooks can only move up and down and left and right. They can't go diagonally, which would make sense, as a robot castle in real life probably wouldn't turn very well. Movementorily, the complete opposite of the rook is the bishop, whose piece, instead of a castle, resembles more of a dog whistle. A dog named Bishop. The bishop is more tricky than the rook, in most cases, because of the fact that the casual chess player isn't thinking diagonally. Because after all, most of the pieces just go straight forward. But the bishop's smart. He waits there, sees the time to strike, and misses it, because you're not playing chess online where it tells you where every single piece can go every turn. No, you're playing chess in real life where you have to make decisions. My personal favorite piece is the knight. The knight is quite the kooky fellow. As by the time the knight was being added to the game, I'm sure they already gave up all the basic movement options to the other pieces, so the knight gets a very special movement pattern. You see, the knight instead move in a direction, move in the same direction, strafe in an L shape. And that L strafe is what makes the knight so unique. And also the ability to jump over its own pieces, but that's not nearly as cool as moving in an L shape. But you might be wondering, if the knight is represented by a horse, wouldn't that mean it would be more coordinated than strafing in an L shape? Because that seems pretty clumsy to me. Well, yes, I agree. Why would a horse move so uncoordinatedly? I have a theory. It's not actually a horse that's being ridden by a knight. The knight and the horse are the same thing. The knight is wearing a horse helmet, and it's difficult to see outside of the horse helmet, so that's why the knight walks all staggered. Despite being called the queen itself doesn't actually really have any interesting abilities. I mean, it's just a rook and a bishop combined. Whoop-de-doo. Sure, it's the most powerful piece in the game, but is that all you got? How come the queen can't teleport, huh? Wouldn't that make it a bit more interesting? Yes, I move knight to b4. Well, I move queen to checkmate, so take that. That's probably why it can't teleport. As for the physical depiction of the queen, it's just a piece with a crown on it. There's not much to comment on there. Although it is quite interesting that if a pawn manages to get to the enemy's complete other side of the board, or I guess not the enemy's complete other side of the board, your complete other side of the board, which is the enemy's side of the board, then the pawn gets promoted to a queen. Although I suppose the pawn could also be promoted to, like, a bishop or something, but why would you want that when you could have a queen? Yes, a classic example of old monarchy. If I want to become the queen, all I have to do is take a walk across the enemy's lawn. And then finally, the most important piece of the game, but is somehow less interesting than the pawn, the king. Yeah, there's only one king, no getting promoted to king. You can get promoted to queen if you try hard enough, but there's only one king. And that king has the epic ability of moving one square at a time in any direction. It's a slightly upgraded pawn. But while the king's movement options are pretty dumb, the actual mechanic of the king is the most important of the game, because if you lose the king, you lose the game. The whole point of the game is just to protect the king, who of course just happens to be one of the most helpless pieces in the game. How embarrassing would it be to be the most powerful figure in your army, only to be ran down by some lowly pawn who is high on caffeine? Though I suppose a story reason as to why the king needs to be protected is because while the king may not be physically active himself, the king has a very strong strategic mind and is commanding all the other pieces. So you could say that the players are playing as the king, which is why the king's the most important, because if there's no player, then there's really no competition, is there? Well, those are my contributions to the chess lore. This has been Billy Nocho's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. I'm considering constructing small chocolate effigies of myself to sell to the market. Yeah, that's what the bunny I met said. Ah, what a nice day to spend at the docks. Although there are no boats parked here, so I guess now it's just a plank of wood. But at some point in the past it was a dock, and I'm sure at some point in the future it'll be a dock. I've been thinking about water recently, as a matter of fact, because, you know, water is needed to survive. And while lots of foods contain water, so you can kind of get passive water, the best way to acquire water in your own self is through the process of drinking water. Yeah, even I know how stupid that sentence sounded. But you know, water, docks, a horrible segue into the fact that I'm going to be talking about Atlantis. Ooh. Everyone knows what Atlantis is. It's everyone's favorite location that everyone really wants to exist, but, like, there's pretty much no chance it exists. You've probably seen it all over media. Atlantis, we gotta find the Atlantis. Go on a scuba diving mission to find the Atlantis. Maybe the story takes place back in time where Atlantis was not known for being wet, and instead known for being dry. Or maybe it's another story about finding Atlantis. Finding Atlantis. Everyone wants to find Atlantis. It truly is the Bigfoot of location. Atlantis' whole thing is that it was supposedly once not underwater, but then, at some point in time, it sunk under the water. So now no one can live there, excepting mermaids. I'd like to give a special hello to any mermaids watching from Atlantis right now. All 0 of you, because Atlantis is underwater and thus cannot get internet. But if you're a mermaid watching from another location, hi. Interesting fun fact about mermaids. It is famously told that Christopher Columbus, yeah, remember that guy, supposedly thought that manatees were mermaids on one of his expeditions or something. And, like, Chris, you're stupid. While manatees and mermaids are equally as cute, they most certainly do not resemble each other. Now, I can certainly see the appeal of wanting to look for Atlantis, hypothetically, because if you look up pictures of what people think Atlantis looks like, it looks pretty cool. Lots of big pools and, like, big towers, and it doesn't really look like there's much more than that, but it's a nice arrangement. How exactly does one go looking for Atlantis, though? If you were to go out and look for Atlantis yourself, you probably wouldn't be so successful. But let's say you were the protagonist of a Finding Atlantis movie, and now you found Atlantis. Where do you go from here? No, seriously. Yeah, you, Atlantis movie protagonist kid. What are you going to do now with your snorkel that for some reason works completely submerged in water, even though the whole point of a snorkel is that you have to keep the tube above water so you can breathe air? What are you going to do now that you found Atlantis? Write a song about it? I suppose so, that might be fun, but really, what are you going to do about it? You found Atlantis. Yeah? So what? The Titanic was found quite a while ago, and what have they done about that? Researched it remotely, but, like, they've never retrieved it. And when you really think about it, a big boat, a multiple $1 million boat, just there at the bottom of the ocean. Pretty darn heavy. How are you going to lift it out? You can't. It's pretty much impossible. Unless you have an aquatic bucket wheel excavator, but those don't exist. But hey, the size of that boat, pretty minuscule compared to Atlantis' size, supposedly. You look up how big Atlantis is, that's really, really, really big. Like, way bigger than I thought it was. 10 times bigger than I thought it was. 100 times bigger than I thought it was. I thought it was a city. That's a large country. Not the lost city of Atlantis. This is the lost continent of Atlantis. The missing piece to Pangea. If this thing existed, don't you think it would be found by now? And it would be pretty easy to research remotely, if it was found, because you could just send a drone down to the bottom of the ocean anywhere in the middle of the Atlantic, and they'd take pictures of Atlantic. Click, click. Hi, Atlantis. Smile. Say cheese. It's very big. It's so big, in fact, that I think the whole it sinking is baloney in and of itself, because I'm not sure the tectonic plates could allow such a thing to happen, where something of that size could go down under. I mean, it's humongous. That is a very big city. Now, the city of Pompeii, when that was destroyed by Mount Vesuvius, it ashenized everyone and made them into, like, perfect ash sculptures. Atlantis, this is the bottom of the ocean. Thousands of pounds of pressure put on top of it. It's not going to be preserved nearly as well. I'm sure the mermaids of Atlantis were begging for a volcano eruption rather than just being swept under the world, like dust bunnies under a carpet. I mean, I know that the Atlantic Ocean is the saltiest ocean in the world, but did it really have such an agenda against the city of Atlantis? Was it because they stole the name from the Atlantic Ocean? Well, that was just in commemoration of the fact that this big city was built in the Atlantic Ocean. But no, I guess the Atlantic Ocean didn't take that too well, because it really laid the hammer down. Really, it's just ridiculous to think that something that big could go missing like that. I'm sure when Atlantis was in trouble, they were contacting the mermaids like, hey guys, come over here and help lift up this big island thing. And they're like, no way, we don't get paid enough for this. I mean, obviously they don't get paid enough. Have you ever seen a depiction of a mermaid wearing clothes? No, because they couldn't afford it. Although I guess the real reason would be because wearing a shirt would be kind of pointless because it would just get wet, considering they're in the water the whole time. And also if the shirt had a collar, then that might get in the way of the gills and the breathing. And also a mermaid couldn't wear shoes because they don't have legs. And also a mermaid couldn't wear a hat because of the whole underwater thing, and the hat would just be pulled off by the current. And a mermaid couldn't wear gloves because it's difficult to swim in gloves compared to not gloves because of the webs on the hands. And a mermaid couldn't wear a vest because they aren't very fashionable. It's also quite baffling why mermaids are also always depicted wearing makeup, when that would also wash away because of the whole underwater thing. Maybe it is waterproof, but come on, this is like 3,000 years ago. They didn't have the technology. And it's also quite confusing why mermaids have so many synonyms. Mermaid, dugong, sea cow, and oh wait, that's the wrong thing. But I guess that's all there is for Atlantis. This has been Billy Netto's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. Hello, and welcome to Billy Netto's Rant. A second time.
Are you talking directly to me? Because if you want me to give you a topic to talk about and stuff, you could just ask.
Well, no, I was just really acknowledging that you were there. Hi again. Have you seen Jelly anywhere?
Oh yeah. Strange how I've never met her before. Strange as buying two phones, calling one to the other, while eating the second one that's receiving the call, so you can listen to the phone being eaten from the first phone. Well, I suppose it isn't nearly as strange as that, but it's quite strange, isn't it? I mean, I would like to meet her, but how will we both be here? After all, and you might not believe this but just by looking at me, but I have quite a very busy schedule. I mean, after all, there are only 12 hours in a night, and everything I like to do takes at very least an hour. No offense, Billy. So that leaves only a dozen things to be done. And in this case right now, I've probably wasted like 10 seconds of that 12 hours just talking to you about talking about other things. So if you're not going to talk about talking about other things, then I'm just going to go talk to someone else about talking about other things. Do you know another person?
No, unfortunately. I think I'm the only person doing this in, the area. But I mean, it's always fun to talk to people. So if you'd like anything to be talked about, then just, say it.
Pollo leche.
What?
Pollo leche. It means chicken milk in Spanish, and is thus a very great way to know if someone speaks Spanish, because if you run up to them and say chicken milk, then they'll most likely be surprised, and so that means that they know how to speak Spanish. Otherwise, you may have a fun conversation about learning Spanish.
Well, yes, I suppose that is a good test to see if they know Spanish, but isn't the act of screaming chicken milk more surprising than the language it's being screamed in?
Well, you see, Billy, if you don't understand the language that chicken milk is being screamed in, then you don't understand what is being said at all. And instead, all the context you have is that you're in the park and some guy is yelling at you. In which case, your first instinct would probably be to beat him up. However, if you were to know the contents of what was being said, in this case chicken milk, then the amount that you could potentially beat the guy up has increased drastically. This is why it's a good idea to always yell chicken milk while wearing full armor. Football or gladiatorial, doesn't matter as long as it provides some sort of protection. For added effect, you could also use a megaphone and just tape it to the helmet. I've had some good times with that one. And I should probably be leaving soon because there's only about 4 more hours until the date.
4 more hours until the date? You have a date?
Not in the way you're probably thinking of the word. No. The date is just when I call it when it goes from today to the next day. Changing the date. Although, I don't mean to brag, but this night is usually the exception. Because I usually have a date in the way you're thinking of, and also the date in the fruit form. But not tonight, no. I have a puppet show to go see.
Yeah, dating calendaromically, of course. That's what I thought you were talking about. And there's also the pretty interesting process of carbon dating, which is where you take an old thing and look at it, and then, use science to figure out how old it is. The exact sciences, I'm not sure, because I've never carbon dated something before, because I don't really see the need to.
That's probably why you're still single, Billy. Because you're not dating carbon, you're dating, hydrogen or something. Everyone knows carbon-based life is where it's at. I mean, this is just some constructive criticism I'm giving right now, but you don't see too many people in a relationship with a bucket of water. I'm joking. It's just a joke. I know you're not interested in that, Billy. It's okay.
Yeah, I know. I do appreciate nice chemistry-based humor. That's a homonym. Chemistry, as in dating chemistry, and chemistry, as in periodic table chemistry. But in interest of your time, Mr. Cream Pop, I guess we're gonna end now.
This has really been Creamy Cream Pop's rant, and I'm sorry for taking over your show, Billy.